Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolute foundational inputs of biologics manufacturing. We're assuming you've got the broad strokes down, so we're going to get incredibly focused. We're stripping everything back to look exclusively at cell substrates and raw materials. This is the bedrock, folks. If you don't get this part right, absolutely nothing that happens later on even matters.
Think about this for a second. Before you ever flip the switch on a massive bioreactor, what's actually powering your biologic? Well, the cell itself is the factory. We aren't just assembling parts on a conveyor belt here, we're cultivating living organisms to do the microscopic heavy lifting for us. Your product's success is entirely dependent on the specific biological engine you choose and how securely you maintain its blueprint.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. Choosing the host cell, the cell banking system, managing raw materials, viral and microbial safety, and we'll wrap it all up with a case study on Northlake Biologics.
Section 1. Choosing the host cell.
So when you're selecting a biological system, you've got options. You might look at microbial systems, like bacteria, which, they're fantastic for simple proteins because they grow incredibly fast and give you high yields. But consider mammalian cells, like the famous CHO or Chinese hamster ovary cells. They are absolutely the go-to for complex glycoproteins and antibodies. Why? Because they have this one key characteristic. They can actually perform human-like modifications, like glycosylation. Microbial systems, they just can't do that.
When comparing our two biggest hitters side by side, developers face a really classic dilemma. Do we go for the speed and low cost of microbes, or do we absolutely need that complex, human-like glycosylation that only mammalian cells offer? Imagine you're tasked with making a massive, complex antibody. That glycosylation pattern, it is not just for show. It directly dictates how the drug functions and how safe it is for the patient's immune system. Sure, microbial cells might get you a product way faster, but it just won't be the right product. All right, let's test your understanding real quick. Take a second to think about this. Why do mammalian cell lines, like CHO, remain the absolutely dominant host for complex antibodies over those simpler, faster alternatives?
Right, it's because they can perform those human-like post-translational modifications, including glycosylation. The crucial takeaway here is that meeting critical quality attributes always outranks speed. It literally doesn't matter how fast or cheap your process is if the final biologic doesn't work in a human patient, or worse, triggers a dangerous immune response. That human-compatible modification, that is your golden ticket.
Moving on to Section 2, the cell banking system.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth don't we just manufacture straight from our original, perfectly characterized master source? I mean, if the master clone is the perfect blueprint, why add extra steps? It kind of seems counterintuitive at first, right?
Well, we actually use a two-tier vault system. The master cell bank, or MCB, is our totally irreplaceable reference. Meanwhile, the working cell bank, the WCB, takes on all the daily wear and tear of routine manufacturing. Think of the master cell bank like the original constitution locked away in a highly secure vault. It's extensively characterized for identity, purity, and genetic stability. You literally do not touch it unless you absolutely have to. Instead, you take just one vial from that master bank and expand it to create a working cell bank. And it's this working cell bank that gives you the vials you actually thaw out to kick off your routine production. This dual bank structure creates this amazing continuous life cycle map. It gives us perfect traceability, all the way from a single original clone to literally years of commercial production. It's a masterclass in risk management, honestly. You start by cloning to establish your production clone. Then you create and characterize your master cell bank. From there, you expand to the working cell bank, and finally, you draw from that working bank for routine use. And all the while, you're maintaining incredibly strict inventory management and ongoing monitoring to ensure stability. So every single commercial batch can trace its lineage right back to a specific working vial and ultimately to that one original master clone.
Okay, let's do another quick check to make sure this vital two-tier concept is really locked in. Why go through all the trouble and expense of maintaining this dual bank structure? Exactly. Using the working cell bank for routine production protects the limited, irreplaceable master cell bank from being depleted. If you exhaust or, heaven forbid, contaminate your master cell bank, you basically lose your entire foundational product engine. It's gone. By using the working cell bank for the daily grind, the master cell bank stays safe, pristine, and ready to generate a brand new working cell bank whenever the old one runs out.
All right, Section 3, Managing Raw Materials. So, the modern biotech industry is actually heavily shifting away from riskier animal-derived media and moving straight toward chemically defined systems. Historically, we had to rely on animal-derived components to get cells to grow. But the thing is, animal products are naturally variable. Literally no two batches are exactly alike, and they carry this really scary theoretical risk of introducing adventitious agents like viruses. By switching to chemically defined serum-free systems, we know exactly what is going into that culture, right down to the molecule. It drastically improves batch-to-batch consistency and overall safety.
But even with chemically defined systems, you're still relying on suppliers. And suppliers, well, sometimes they change their processes. When they do, you can't just blindly accept the new material. You have to run through the strict three-step risk assessment. First, assess criticality. How directly does this material affect cell growth and product quality? Second, assess variability. Is the new source bringing in meaningfully different characteristics? And third, assess controls. Are our current detection capabilities actually good enough to catch a problem before it ruins a whole batch? Let's put you in the hot seat. Imagine you're the developer and you suddenly get a supplier change notification for a material used directly in your cell culture. What is your most appropriate first step? This is a critical moment that can seriously make or break a manufacturing campaign. Right, you absolutely must assess the criticality and variability risk of the change before even deciding on what qualification you need. Even a super minor raw material change can completely disrupt a sensitive living cell culture. This risk-based assessment is what dictates your next move. If the risk is high, that triggers a whole cascade of additional qualification testing before that new material is ever allowed anywhere near your production line.
Moving right along to Section 4, viral and microbial safety. We have to be on constant alert for invisible threats throughout the whole process. Adventitious agents are basically a broad category for any unwanted biological contaminants that definitely aren't supposed to be there. Then you have mycoplasma, which is a specific nightmare. They're these incredibly small bacteria without a traditional cell wall, which makes them notoriously difficult to detect using standard methods. And finally, bioburden, which is just the baseline level of viable microorganisms at any given manufacturing stage. We can't just test for these at the very end. Safety controls have to be woven into the very fabric of the process itself.
To combat these invisible threats, global regulators lean on the ICH Q5A guideline. The current revision, R2, relies on 3 core pillars to ensure viruses never make it into the final product. First, you block viruses right at the door with extremely strict sourcing controls for your raw materials. Second, you actively hunt for them with extensive testing of your cell banks and process stages. And third, you have to design your process with the physical capability to actually clear or inactivate any viruses that somehow slip through.
And finally, Section 5, a case study on Northlake Biologics.
In this fictional Northlake case study, we actually get to see this entire foundational journey play out. They had to weigh their development timeline against the need for specific molecule modifications, and they wisely chose the CHO cell engine to get that human-like glycosylation. They established and meticulously characterized their master and working cell banks. And later, when a supplier changed the sourcing of a feed component, they didn't panic. They used that 3-step risk-based assessment we talked about, demanding extra qualification testing before letting that new feed touch their precious cells. It is literally textbook execution of building a secure biological foundation. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. If the cell itself is the factory, how secure is the foundation you're building for it? Because choosing the right host cell, banking it flawlessly, heavily managing every single drop of raw material, and building an absolute fortress against microbial threats, that is exactly what separates a fragile little experiment from a robust, world-class biologic. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and always make sure you're questioning your foundations.